We have a special addition to the show notes for today's PeopleNova Podcast episode. As you know by now, we ask every guest to share their favorite art. It's one of my favorite questions to ask. It stems from a quote by Darren Walker. Without art, there is no empathy. Without empathy, there is no justice. And we all know empathy is an essential part of leadership in building organization culture. So today's guest shares his favorite art in the episode, and then a sample is included in the show notes. Make sure to check it out. Let's dive into the conversation with startup advocate Suchit Jain. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the PeopleNova Podcast. My name is Rachel O'Neill, and I am so excited about today's guests. Hey, Suchit, how are you?
Rachel, how are you?
I am fantastic. Can you do us a favor? Can you introduce yourself for our audience?
Sure. My name is Suchit Jain, and I'm Vice President of Business Development and Strategy at SolidWorks Dassault Systems.
Fantastic. And Suchit, I love your LinkedIn profile. It says you are a startup advocate. Tell me about that.
Absolutely. I mean, look, of course, I work at SolidWorks and Dassault Systems, and in the process, we deal with so many product innovations all year round, and there's so many wonderful companies doing stuff. And part of our program also is to encourage these startups and help them in achieving their goals. You know that it's hard for a startup, money and all the networking and the technology they need to get to make their businesses successful. So what I do is I work with a lot of accelerators, offer our sort of guidance, mentorship. For example, for Mass Robotics here, I'm out of the Boston office. So we have Mass Robotics or Mass Challenge, and really help these companies in sort of, what we see around from a technology perspective, from a business perspective, etc., and also help them network. So that's kind of what I do, all year round as well, in addition to the
in addition to your day job, like we all wear many hats. And yes, Suchit and I met through our startup advocate passion, Mass Challenge, and then also Artisans Asylum, which is not totally core to like startup-y land, but there's plenty of innovation happening at Artisans Asylum.
Well, I mean, maybe let me just, I'm interrupting you, but let me just add very, very quickly that so one is the startups, and as we see it, we see funded and structured startups and all that. But to me, innovation is not just structured. Innovation also happens on grassroots level. So one of the things I'm very passionate about as part of my job, as well as personally, get involved into a lot of this grassroots innovation, which is happening through fab labs in different parts of the world, which are not necessarily VC funded and everything. Sometimes they are in very emerging economies where, funding and money and even technology is hard to get to, places like Bhutan. We have done some work in amazing places in Bhutan, in Rwanda, in Central Africa, or even in India, in this village called Pabal, where I feel like it was, the grassroots of innovation. It was also termed as Fab Lab Zero. And maybe another time I'll tell you the full story about that.
But I love if I could reframe what you're pointing out is when there are constraints, people really get creative, right? Like you're never going to have all the money in the world. You're never going to have all the time in the world. You're never going to have all the resources to like, do whatever you want to do. But when you have those constraints, it really forces creativity and innovation. Like, what do I have in front of me and how do I make that work?
Absolutely. I mean, in fact, I was just thinking about it yesterday. There was another discussion we were having, very separate discussion around businesses and how businesses have to change themselves in this COVID environment and how they have to be digitally sort of, change their company to this digital company, if you will, to survive. And I was thinking about my own personal experience. Actually, last week we tried very interesting stuff. There's a chef, right? And, restaurant businesses having problems.
Oh, yeah.
So these guys, it's called Weco, and I don't know how it's pronounced. It's WECO. but this is a husband and wife chefs, and they bring the restaurant experience and they cook for you, but you have to do an order sort of a week before, and then they will select a number of orders and you go pick it up. And it's restaurant quality food. You pay after you have had the experience. You can tip, not tip, whatever. But what they've done is they have kind of modified themselves. And my wife and I, we love the experience of it. And in fact, so much that we've now ordered some of the Thanksgiving dinner from them as well. And that's what it is, right? When they were constrained, they came up with an idea to do what they need to do. So I agree, in the startup world, the constraints do create innovation, if you will, or spur or be a catalyst for it.
Great. Yes. Be a catalyst for innovation in a different way. And I think folks get a little bit of pressure from this innovate, mantra. And it's like, I don't know, I feel like small adjustments, even like 1 degree notches, can still be innovation and can think it and look at things differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when, classically, when people think about innovation, they think about, Einstein or inventing electricity.
And these big, like, eureka moments.
Yeah. And those are discoveries, and maybe innovation and invention may be two different things. People think of pressure because of, I need to invent the next flying machine. Well, that's not what it is. Sometimes it's just solve the problem. And if you can solve the problem in an easy way, it doesn't have to be a flying machine. It could be as simple as, you remember those, what do you call them? The sticky notes. It could be as simple as solving a problem, or what the restaurant guy I told about earlier. They're just tweaking it. And to me, that is really innovation, because invention is great. Innovation actually solves problems. And that's what it is. And by the way, I'll do a quick plug-in for engineers, because I'm an engineer.
Okay, great.
I love this quote, which I always tell everybody, that the scientists discover the world, but engineers create it. So, or the scientists are dreaming all the things, but we help create it. So I think the innovators should be the engineers. We need the scientists as well, but be an engineer.
Yeah.
In way of creating the innovation, make it happen.
I love it. I love it. And one of the things that I heard is solving problems, right? And oftentimes we coach, or at least I do, I coach entrepreneurs to fall in love with the problem, not the solution, right? Because if they fall in love with their code or their item, their thing, they're solving for maybe their own problem, right? Or their complexity of their design and final output. But, we talk about solving that problem, right? The sticky notes,
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody who's an inventor or sort of a founder of a company, you have to be passionate about what you're doing and your technology. But I think there is an art of also understanding the problem. And sometimes it's as simple as about listening. And listening doesn't really mean to be quiet and listen, but more importantly, when you're listening, you're understanding and giving the right feedback. And I remember, remember that in my early days when we were talking about, how do you discover customer needs? And there was this mantra of 7. Ask 7 questions at least. Why?
Oh, and the 7 why.
Says something, you say why, and then again why. And a good example we used to use was, somebody goes to Home Depot or whatever and says, I want a hammer. Now, of course, the Home Depot guy is not going to say why. He's just going to sell it to you.
Yeah.
But the point is, why do you need a hammer? Well, I want to put a nail in the. Well, why do you want to put the nail? Well, I want to hang a picture. Why do you want to hang a picture? Well, it's my family, and so it gets back to the core problem is that the person wants to showcase his family and whatever, and then maybe it's not nail and a hammer. Let me just
hang some art on a very boring wall,
and that may be the right solution. Because if you just sort of followed and met the customer demand, you would have given them the hammer. but now you gave them a smart picture board because you listen. So that's the difference between just listening just necessarily doesn't mean just doing what the customer is saying, but asking why and get the motivation behind that. Because if you solve that motivation, then everything is done. People people buy in emotions, and those you need to understand the real need.
I love this. I love you're totally getting into like the whole point of our podcast. This is great. So the listening, I love how you said listening does not mean being silent. Can you expand on that? I totally agree with you.
Well, I mean passive aggressive in very simple. A lot of times, I'm sure you've been in meetings. We all have been in meetings at work where you have some person and you shut off, because you just don't want to participate. So in that case, you can be saying, well, I'm listening, but you really are not, because you have shut off yourself and you're not trying to understand the person. You're just not speaking back. So to me, that's being passive aggressive. And what I mean by listening is really kind of paying your full attention to the person and giving feedback in a positive way, to me, is listening. And in fact, even on one-on-one conversation, forget work or startup or whatever, whenever you're talking with somebody, right, you have to be in the conversation. And being in the conversation is being attentive and really trying to understand what the other person is saying. And that's what I mean by listening.
Yeah, I love it. So often, I know there's some thought leaders out there that say that oftentimes we listen to respond, not listen for understanding. And what I think I hear you saying, listening, right, is I think it's really focusing on that listen for understanding. Am I really understanding your perspective?
Right. That's
or am I just trying to respond with my point because my feelings, in the moment?
Yeah. And sometimes the other part of it also, maybe a little trick, which sometimes I don't follow myself, but I think it's an important one, is sometimes you're busy taking notes. So let's say you're in a meeting, your work, or even when we were students in college, right? You're busy taking notes, like, I don't want to miss anything. Yeah. Well, guess what? You're not listening because you're just busy typing or writing down. And you miss the essence of the lecture or the essence of the talk or essence of the meeting. So somehow figure that out, that, listening is not just actively taking notes and then paying attention on it later. Might work for a classroom because things are so fast these days. By the way, that's why I like the online part of lectures.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you don't have to take notes. You can probably record or take screen captures and whatever, so it makes it easier.
I'm loving the life on Zoom and like adapting. And I know there's a lot of people who are guilty of multitasking and like having all the things running in the background, right? I like it because some of it is the replay, right? Being able to go back, right? Some of it is seeing the screen, but I think some of it, and maybe it's just me, right? Some of it is just, this is the attention that I want to give this topic, right? And being fully present in there. You touched on it a little bit and you were like, oh yeah, we have to figure out how to be present in the moment. What are some tips that worked for you over the course of your life, career, that helped you be really present in the moment?
Well, it's a deeper question. By the way, I do philosophy as well as part-time philosophy, and my wife is fed up of it, but that's what it is. But a couple of things. One thing I always say that, whenever you are having a bad time, bad moment, I think of a roller coaster where if it is bad, the good news is it's going to be better next day. So
as long as you like roller coasters.
Yeah, it's like, hey, today's bad, tomorrow it will be better. And sometimes when you look at that, then things tend to become better. The other one is always think about the bigger picture. And I'm talking about a little bit of, if you are having a bad day type of thing, then in the bigger picture, it's only work or it's only X, Y, or Z. So it doesn't matter. So, why not live for today? And to tell you frankly, I mean, whatever we do, past is past. Every philosophically speaking, everything we just talked a few minutes ago is history. and everything which is going to happen in future is going to happen in future. You just could, so you have to live in the moment, but you have to also live in a moment such that your future will turn out to be better. So, and if you take everything in a positive way, then it always turns out to be better. That's how I see it, and it always works.
I love the optimism. I'm gonna make a movie reference. I was chatting with my therapist the other day, and I said, "I promise it's not Fight Club." And he's like, "Okay." And I said, "I have had to reframe, and it's been successful for me. So I share it with my clients and our audience, right? I've had to reframe and say, all right, what can today Rachel do so that when future Rachel comes, because we know we believe there's going to be a future Rachel, right? So when future Rachel happens, I can look back and say, thank you, past Rachel."
Yeah.
Right. What is the choice I can make today so that when the future happens, I can look back, and it helps shift some of that negative self-talk. I know that a lot, and that imposter syndrome, and that, feelings, internal feelings that we all have, right? If I can look back and say, thank you for everything that you did to help create future conditions for success.
Yeah. I mean, one philosophical thought which comes to my mind is about, we're in the world of instant gratification, and that's what we teach. A lot of times when we are a product software company, and we say, well, we have to devise a product which gives instant gratification to people and all of that. That's great. That's good for sales. But one of the things in life, philosophically speaking, is that everything connects. So doing the right thing, and whatever the right thing is, we won't go into that debate of what the right thing is, but whatever that is, doing the right thing always, so the looking back is not about 5 minutes from now or 10 minutes, but everything connects back. When you look back, 5 years or 10 years, you will notice patterns which only happened because you did certain right things in there. Of course, you cannot know that sitting from now. So sometimes I would also say is continue to do the things which you need to do, but don't expect everything instantly, but it will come, it will pay back. All my gray hair can tell you that it does. So
I like, you mentioned pattern identification, right? Like looking back in the history, pattern identification is good and it's healthy, but then there's also some patterns of triggers and interactions that we can also reflect on and be like, oh, okay, that happened. How do I look at that differently? How do I, approach that situation? Maybe it's with a coworker who I normally shut down, right? And I don't want to listen actively to them because I'm too busy formulating my response, right? How might you reframe that situation with someone who you're not ready to listen to?
I mean, one thing which always I do, and it has sort of worked for me, and I'll share, there are days, I mean, I haven't been to work, but, we have Zoom meetings and stuff like that. But, when you come back, maybe you had some disagreements, whatever. I do reflect back when I'm driving back, and I would encourage everybody to have, by the way, this is one of the disadvantages of online Zoom, because you're always on.
Yeah.
You have no reflection time. When I'm driving from work back, at least I've got that 30 minutes, if you will, when I'm driving back. And I think about it, what I could have done better during that day, or I could have, and sometimes this is what I do. I actually take the time and call the person and said, hey, maybe, this is what I did. I want to make sure, let me explain my position. Just wanted to make sure that this is what I was trying to say. And yes, I might have made a mistake here or not. So the important part is what reflection does is it lets you kind of understand, because it's very important that any problem can not be solved unless you identify or even acknowledge it. And the reflection allows, by the way, in people who are doing coding and everything, in the Scrum methodology has that. You have the reflection on your code. all of that. It's the same thing, this is Scrum for life.
I love it. So all our engineers who are listening to us, this is Scrum for life. Okay. If I have to give a formula, but I like how you said that, like you have to acknowledge and admit there was a problem, right? There has to be a moment of apology, right? Whether it's with a coworker, colleague, whether it's with a loved one, right? A family member, right? And I'll, expand it a little bit broadly, but what's going on in the States right now with racism and a lot of dignity hurts and feels, right? Like there has to be a moment of acknowledgement when that happened and moving forward and repairing some of that, I feel.
Yeah, I think that the big point of view, my point of view is very simple, right? I always say, and there's a difference between discussion and argument. In an argument, it's always, here's my point of view and this is it, and I don't want to listen to your point of view.
Adopt my point of view. I'm going to continue saying it until someone else adopts it. Yeah.
Right. Oh, and the discussion is, here's my point of view. Here are my arguments for that point of view, and I'm open to listening to your point of view. And this is why a debate versus an argument are two different things. In debate, I can take any of the sides and can debate, because then I'm considering the other side. And that's what we have been taught. Like, debate is a good thing. Argument is a bad thing. So do debates and not arguments, because a good debater or a good person should be able to debate both sides. Mm-hmm. And so what I would recommend everybody to be a debater in life rather than an argumentator, because then you can take both the sides and see the point of view of each one and pros and cons.
Yeah. I like to reframe it for my clients and say, let's find a way to illuminate blind spots, right? Like I have a lived experience. I have a perspective, right? I went through life in a certain way, but maybe I wasn't taught Scrum, right? So I have a different, I don't know what that is. So illuminate my blind spots, right? On that point, on that discussion, so that I can see another way, as long as I'm open to it.
Yeah, it's all about information as well. Being able to. Most of prejudice or anything else comes because of ignorance and not knowing certain things. We are all fearful of what we don't know.
Sure.
So that's that. So if we know more, then we'll fear less.
I feel like an infographic, the more you know, and that little rainbow star that goes across. Life lessons from Suchit. I love it. We've talked a lot about active listening, and the point of the podcast is really the human side of business, right? Like, because we work with a lot of humans, and going back to startups and our appreciation, our advocacy for startups, if they don't have the resources, right? Like being able to prototype and build that, oftentimes the second reason that startups don't work out is because of the team dynamics, because of the leadership style, because of the kind of the wonky people involved, right? Which is why we talk about the human side of business, because as much as we algorithm and as much as we, have the software and Scrum, like we're always going to have people.
Yeah, an individual working excellence does not guarantee team success, right? So the team dynamics have to be good. And, this reminds me of, I like Simon Sinek, if you know who that is.
Yep. Start with why.
Yeah, start with why. But, he has a point about, maybe this is not the right, I don't know what's kosher on your podcast, but he talks about who's the asshole, right?
Nice, do it.
Yeah, I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's like he says, in team dynamics, what happens is you go around and you say, who's that person? And everybody knows, but somehow the leader is ignorant about it. And he talks about, if you were to draw a graph between a person who's really good in terms of their excellence versus trustworthiness, like, do I trust this person?
Yeah.
He said a successful company would be the person where you can trust more. Of course, they should be able to do the job. But if somebody's really good at it but not as trustworthy versus somebody average and really trustworthy, then he would take that person than the other one. And I think in it's an important thing as startups, as founders, especially who are sort of very good in their craft and what they do. They have to be conscious if they want to build a team, then they have to be conscious about this fact, because a lot of times we put too much thing on functional excellence or intelligence, and not in the we focus on IQ, not EQ, as we say, right? The emotional quotient, and I think successful startup guys will figure that out.
They do. How do they get there though? Like, because it's a tough thing to really acknowledge and be like, oh, okay, so-and-so is the asshole in the room. Yeah, but they're a 10x coder, so we need to keep them around.
I mean, there is no, just like everything else in life, there's no black and white. There's no perfect and good, perfect or you have to figure it out. As long as you're aware, I always say, it's a center of gravity is the awareness of these things. And if you're aware, you automatically will be the right leader. So first thing is, do you recognize that, right? And of course, what you're doing right now, or these podcasts or whatever, help them to get to that. And as long as they're aware of those things, they will tend to make the right decisions, right? So it's not about let's find that guy and fire him or not, but it's as long as they have that mentality, then the right thing will happen. Here's another philosophical example of the Darwinian theory of evolution. I always believe, and you can apply to companies as well, company culture. And in startup, as a founder, your job is not just to deliver. Of course, you're going to deliver the need and all of that, and you'll be successful. But if you want to build a company, you'll have to build the company culture. Mm-hmm. And that culture is very important. And in Darwinian theory, as I say, survival of the fittest. So if you have a culture where everybody is infighting and that's the only way to succeed within your company, guess what? Everybody would become like that, right? They're going to be fighting because it's survival of the fittest. So if they need to grow fangs, they will grow fangs. On the other hand, if you put in a culture where people recognize by helping each other as teamwork that they will all be successful, then that's the culture you will have in your company. So I think it is important and in no way, this does not mean that you don't have to be competitive. You don't want to be ambitious, none of that. Absolutely, you need all of that. But that idea of loyalty and trustworthiness, where you're not standing on somebody else's, you're not pushing somebody else down to get your success.
I love it. I like to reframe and say we all deserve sunshine, right? We're all flowers. I use a little bit of a nature metaphor, right? We're all flowers. Some of us need full sun, some of us need partial shade, but we all deserve sunshine in the world. So when someone tries to take away our sunshine, it's not helpful for anyone.
Yeah. So I think as startups, everybody has to think about that. And that's why you see a lot of times that for different, not just for this reason, but for a lot of other reasons as well, that the founders don't end up being the CEOs in the long term. Because if it's VC invested company, they want certain level of discipline and things like that, where it's not very sort of functional driven, but people and process driven, things like that. But with that said, I've seen a lot of founders, very good CEOs as well.
Yeah.
Because the advantage they have is that they have the passion for what they're doing. Plus, they have the emotional intelligence to lead, and that would be the perfect startup founder CEO.
Absolutely, and I talk about emotions and empathy all of the time on the podcast, right? And with all my clients, because it really is important. And the research is there, but it's like, okay, so that's our knowledge, but how do we translate that into practice and behavior? So I want to be real specific. How do you, if you're a founder listening and maybe you've gotten some feedback that you're not as emotionally aware, your investors are like, oof, you're not handling this situation with so-and-so well. how do we become more aware? How do we build trust? How do we have those conversations that are a little bit more delicate or uncomfortable?
I mean, it is a tough thing. I said awareness is important. First, you have to be aware, because sometimes our ego takes over and we are so good and, all of that, that we're not thinking about it. But, a couple of ways to think about it in my view is the North Pole for me always is, am I helping this other person in any way? And if I'm not, I'm just serving my cause, then probably something is wrong somewhere. So have that North Pole. The other one is just be in other person's shoes, right? And just try to understand their perspective. And if you kind of have these awareness of these two things, I'd say 90% of the time you'll do the right thing.
Nice. I love it. I could talk for hours. This has been so much fun. I want to, my one question that I like to ask a lot of every guest actually, because it gets to this point of like empathy and emotion. So Suchit, share with us, what is your favorite art?
My favorite art. Well, I don't know if it's my favorite or not, but something which I do is, and not many people know it, but I actually write poems. So I would, I've taken on occasion, maybe I've written maybe 30, 40 of them, but I do it for my wife. When our first child was born, I would take the time to write a poem, and believe it or not, and I try to do it once, on birthdays, like my wife's birthday, but something meaningful, right? I don't just write for the heck of it. I would write based on experiences. And believe it or not, that has earned me so many brownie points, as they say, right? And it's a good feeling for me and for them as well, for the people you're doing. So that's something I do once in a while, not all the time.
Oh my gosh, Suchit, I love that. I feel like I'm a little window into the soul of Suchit.
Here is my first one. This was, the poem I wrote, I think it was in 2001 or somewhere. I used to live in Los Angeles. I used to work hard. One time I was driving back at 3 a.m. in the morning. We had a product release, whatever. We did that. And my wife was a little bit upset about why I'm always out. So I came back and I had some inspiration. I used to be in Los Angeles, which has the June gloom, as we call it. It's always hazy in the sky.
Okay.
So I wrote this poem with the title, It's a Little Hazy and I'm a Little Crazy for You. And so there was a whole poem around it. And then I have it on my wife actually turned that into her car, the number plate. Because she was so happy that I wrote that, and all my sins were gone.
That is so romantic. I love it.
Yeah. So it's, but I'm glad you asked the question. Otherwise, I wouldn't have shared it.
It's my favorite question to ask all of my guests, right? Because we learn so much about it, right? About our guests, we learn so much about art. I have learned so much about so many different mediums, and I'm an artist, and like we've chatted about that in the past, right? But there's so many mediums that are inspirational out there. From poetry, I started to read a science fiction author. I'm not really big into the genre, but someone recommended, and I'm like, sure, I'll read something different. And it's been a fun fantasy, right? And then other people talk about a particular painting or a portrait that is meaningful to them, right? So I love the expansion. And it all circles back to a quote from one of my favorite quotes from Darren Walker. He's the CEO of the Ford Foundation. It says, without art, there's no empathy. And without empathy, there's no justice.
Yep, I get it. Yeah.
And poetry could not be more deeply soul searching and, generating that inner sense of empathy for for anyone. You have a particular audience when you write your poetry. That's wonderful.
Yeah, well, I mean, and poetry it's not about, I mean, I don't consider it as poetry if it's rhyming, or I don't care about, I'm not into the literate part of the poetry where it has to be certain format and all that. What I mean by poetry simply is expressing certain emotions which I feel strongly about and just writing them on paper. And by the way, here's the other thing, and I can teach that art to anybody. It's very simple. Okay, it's very simple. And here's the.
Okay, here we go. I'm ready.
Yes, it's very simple, and you can try it, and it works. It works. And I've tried. So think about whatever the situation, if it's a person or whatever you want to talk about. Think about the words which come to your mind, which can express your thinking about that person, situation, whatever. Just jot down randomly. This is brainstorm, like how we do brainstorming, and in like 61 minute, all the ideas on the wall. You put all of those words in there. And then you start to take few words. And by the way, the poem will automatically come out. You will see once the words are in front of you, you will see it's a matter of then just picking the few things, connecting with some of the dots. The first thing is just jot down the words, and the poetry will fly out automatically.
So many things are happening right now. I'm like, oh my God, I need to be present. I need to like focus on these instructions. But then part of me is like, oh, I need to write this down. And like, I need to follow these instructions. And then part of me, Suchit, this is just absolutely hilarious. That's what I do.
Yeah, but look, there is a poetry. I can see the poetry coming out of it. Of course, those words have to be related to a person and place.
Folks, this was not scripted. It just happens this way.
Well, there you go. So you can write poetry. And by the way, as startups and everybody, copywriting, I always believe that messaging and copywriting is so much important. How do you get your message when you're not talking with somebody? Somebody's going to read something and everything. So another piece of advice, always make sure your topics are catchy, so you'll grab attention. People have so much of distraction in the world.
Yeah.
So how do you stand out in there? And copywriting, as we call it, as you know, in marketing and all of that, is so important. So get the right copywriter, get somebody who understands your products and can then do justice to them in explaining it to the people in the world.
Founders don't have to be good at everything. They have to understand what they are good at. They have to understand what other skill sets they need. Oh, here we go. Talk about diversity, right? How they need other skill sets, like a great copywriter, to bring the emotions out and complement what they bring to the table. This is fantastic.
Good.
Suchit, thank you so much. This is wonderful. I'm not going to keep you all day. I really appreciate you coming onto the podcast and chatting with our audience. So many gems, so many links. I'm going to drop the book, or we mentioned Simon Sinek and a couple other resources. I'm going to drop that in. I'll summarize the instructions for how to be a poet, according to Suchit.
There you go. Yeah.
I feel like at some point.
And maybe I'll share later on one time for your audience a couple of those poems. And then.
Yes. Oh my gosh, he offered, and I'm going to say yes, folks. I didn't have to peel it out of him or bribe him. Oh, this is great.
And your audience might say, what the heck is he talking about? This poetry that doesn't mean it. Well, it means something to my wife. Okay, that's all that matters. Right?
You know what? And that's it. It's an audience of one. It resonates, right? Oh my gosh, Suchit, your next career is going to be a published poet. I can't wait for you to be Boston's poet laureate. This is wonderful.
I keep everything on. By the way, there's another. So I have my Google Photos and Google Drives. So I have a whole, I memorialize stuff there.
Oh, awesome. We are so excited. We're going to get a little insert of poetry by Suchit to add to this week's podcast. Oh, this is phenomenal. Thank you so much, Suchit. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rachel. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us on the PeopleNova Podcast. My name is Rachel O'Neill. The team here at PeopleNova Human Capital would love to hear from you. We are always curious to hear from our listeners. So go ahead and send us an email, podcast@peoplenovahc.com, with your workplace questions or suggestions for who you'd like to see on our show. If you send us an audio memo, we may include your question on the show. Lastly, we are here to amplify. Our guests are amazing entrepreneurs, and we want you to forward our newsletter to someone in your network who needs to know the amazing things our guests are doing, so together we can make an impact. Thank you so much. Take care, and we will see you next time.